And today I'm going to be giving you guys my top 20 fighters of all time, but we got a little twist, a little spice thrown in there. Every robbery will be reversed, right? So clear robbery wins, like Peter Yan versus Sean O'Malley, for example. Clear robbery loss will be treated as a win for Peter Yan, and that'll be applied to every single fighter on this list who has suffered from some kind of a robbery or benefited from a robbery. It's going both ways. So I wanted to see how that would actually affect a top 20 fighters list. Is this an excuse to sneak Peter Yan into the top 20 GOAT list? Absolutely it isn't, because this is objective, and I know best. You disagree, you're wrong. Simple as that, but you already know that. Now, at number 20, we have Ilia Topuria. Now, there's a difference for me between being the greatest and being the best. Clearly, Ilia Topuria is one of the best fighters of all time. But has he done enough to be considered a top 20 great? For me, the last two finishes, right, knocking out Volkanovski and then knocking out Max Holloway. You can say that Volkanovski had just been knocked out, but just watch the shot land again. You'll probably agree, at least you should agree, that Ilia Topuria would have knocked out any version of Volkanovski with that shot. It made no difference, in my opinion. You can disagree, but that's fine, right? And then to knock out Max Holloway like that, to be the first one to ever do it. I know it's just 2 wins, but then to also finish Bryce Hall and then put a masterclass on Josh Emmett before that. I know that the greatness isn't there in the sense that it is for other fighters higher up on this list. That's why I put him at number 20. I'm not getting ahead of myself here, but I just feel like the last 2 wins alone are enough to consider Ilia for this list, because, spoiler alert, Volkanovski and Max Holloway are on this list alone. So to knock out 2 top 20 greatest fighters of all time is something special, and I think enough to consider him for this list and for him to be number 20. Let me know if you agree. If you disagree, where would you place him on this list, or would you place him on this list at all? For me, he's number 20. As much as it pains me to rank Adesanya in my top 20 list, to be objective, I kind of have to do it. But then we have to consider a couple of things, right? And it's the reason why he's not higher on the list. Because otherwise, if you just go based off of his wins, losses, and that's all really, you can place Izzy higher on here. But I consider a couple of wins a little bit weird. Like, I know he has a win over Anderson Silva, but it seemed like more of a sparring match than anything, passing of the torch, and it was more competitive than it should have been. Wins the belt off of Gastelum, knocks out Robert Whittaker, beautiful. Then the fight with Yoel Romero comes into question here. I consider that a loss for Israel Adesanya due to being a robbery. He did nothing except for spam leg kicks, landed really nothing of significance to the head, had Yoel Romero in no danger. The bigger shots in majority of rounds were landed by Yoel Romero. He landed a big left hand in the first round that clearly stunned Izzy into fighting like a pussy for the remainder of the fight, and I consider that a loss for him. I don't think that you can score that fight for Izzy, although Yoel is to blame as well. Very good knockout against Paulo Costa, goes up to try and win the 205 title, loses to Jan Blachowicz quite dominantly, beats Marvin Vettori again. Right, not a great win in my opinion, like not a great title defense to have. Jared Cannonier is a win that I think it has aged relatively well. Robert Whittaker, another great win, but then again, did he deserve to win that one? Arguably not, but it's too close for me to be considered a blatant robbery. So I'll still give Izzy that win. So 2 wins over Robert Whittaker. A top 3 middleweight of all time in and of itself. You lose to Alex Pereira and then beat Alex Pereira, which is a victory. Like the knockout was spectacular, I can't lie, and has aged extremely well. So that is another elite win for him. And then 2 losses to Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis back-to-back have taken a bit away from him. But the Yoel Romero robbery is the only thing that I can say takes away from Izzy's legacy at all. The rest of these wins are quite good, although give me a break if you think Marvin Vettori is a good win. It really is not. And when I actually look through Izzy's resume, it isn't as impressive as I once thought. I do think it's a bit overrated, but I guess I did forget to bring up Derek Brunson as well. But yeah, Israel Adesanya, number 19. Let me know what you think, because I'm sure there will be a lot of people out there who think that he should be ranked a lot higher, and some who think that he shouldn't even be on the list in the first place. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments section below. But yeah, he's number 19. And at number 18, we have Merab Dvalishvili. Now, I know there's going to be a bunch of dorks out there talking about, horse beef, what the fuck, man? Dude, Merab over Israel Adesanya? Are you kidding me? Absolutely. Absolutely deserved. Just look at his last 7 wins, right? John Dodson, Cody Stamann, not great. Marlon Moraes, Jose Aldo, Peter Yan, Henry Cejudo, Sean O'Malley. Those are all champs, former champs, a literal GOAT run of wins right there. That is a phenomenal run of wins. This was when Marlon Moraes was still kicking. He's still doing pretty well. Chinned Merab pretty early in that fight with a nasty left hook. Merab fought back, finished him. Boring, but dominant win against Jose Aldo. Super dominant fake win. It didn't actually exist as far as I'm concerned. I still believe it was a bit of a fever dream. But make no mistake, Peter Yan will get that one back. Triple C as well. Great dominant win after the first round. Got rocked with that same left hook that Marlon got him with. And then ended up gassing out, and Merab took over the fight completely. And then a very dominant win over Sean O'Malley, a goated run. And I hate using the term goated, but I'm going to use it for this particular moment because it is a goated run of wins, I must say, and I think more than deserving of number 18 on the list. And at number 17, I got Kamaru Usman, man. Another fighter I'm not a huge fan of, but he does have some great wins on the record. Early on in his UFC career, actually beat Leon Edwards, Sean Strickland, which is a win that aged beautifully, but it wasn't the same type of Sean Strickland. Like middleweight Sean Strickland is a different animal completely, so I don't consider that to be a great win, even though it ages well technically. It's still not great. But then Damian Maia, Rafael dos Anjos, an all-time great welterweight in Tyron Woodley, dominated his ass. I remember watching that fight live thinking, goddamn, Usman is going to hold on that belt for quite some time. Colby Covington with the KO, a little bit of an early stoppage, but a great fight. And he found a great shot and ended up rocking Colby shit at the end, broke his jaw. Considering the damage done to his jaw, maybe the stoppage actually does make a bit of sense. Jorge Masvidal, which I get that he was on a great run at that time, but who did he beat? Darren Till and Ben Askren? Okay. Nate Diaz, all right. So for me, a very overrated win. Gilbert Burns was a great win at the time. Jorge Masvidal again, but he fucking flatlined him real bad. And then another win against Colby Covington, but for me, that fight has to be a draw, considering that you can give Usman a 10-8 there and probably score the last 3 rounds for Colby Covington. In my opinion, he was having more success in the final 3 rounds than Usman, but then again, a draw, a win, whatever. He still has a win, a finish win over Colby Covington. So he does have a great resume. He does. There are some overrated victories on there that prevent me from ranking Kamaru Usman any higher than 17, though. But yeah, 17 for me is fair. Let me know what you think, man. Let me know what you think, because he does have a couple of really great wins, but then some overrated ones, man. So I'm not exactly sure, dude. Yeah, but Kamaru Usman is number 17 nonetheless. And at number 16, man, it's Max Holloway for me. I know some people do rank him a bit higher than this, but for me, Max Holloway, he's had some missteps, man. He's had some missteps in his career that take a little bit away from him, but his overall resume is just next level, man. A guillotine finish over Cub Swanson, an injury TKO to Charles Oliveira, which, of course, has aged extremely well, although same argument with Usman's win over Sean Strickland. Like Charles Oliveira at 145 is nowhere near Charles Oliveira at 155. At 155 he looks big, he looks like he fits that weight class, and he even looks big for that weight class, so the weight cut was clearly not good for him. But went over Jeremy Stevens, Ricardo Lamas, finished Anthony Pettis before Anthony Pettis was seriously washed. Back-to-back finishes over Jose Aldo, an all-time great in his own right. Brian Ortega, finish. Frankie Edgar, another all-time great right there. Calvin Kattar, Yair Rodriguez, Arnold Allen, Korean Zombie, which is not a great win. I don't think he should have ever been in there with Max Holloway to begin with at that point in his career. And then a knockout win over Justin Gaethje. And then, you take a little bit away from him with the 3 losses to Volkanovski, the 2 losses to Poirier, and the loss to Ilia Topuria. But at the very, very, very least, these are all losses to fighters who are also on this top 20 list. Spoiler alert, but Max Holloway, number 16 on the list for me. And at number 15, I actually have Dustin Poirier. I have him 1 ahead of Max Holloway, and I know he's never been undisputed, but that really does just come down to the fact that he does have the 2 wins over Max Holloway, and I believe that his resume is just so elite. It actually is similar in some regards to Max Holloway's. They do have some wins that they share. But just getting down to his first great win was against Max Holloway, which aged extremely well. Loses to the Korean Zombie in a fucking barn burner of a fight. And then eventually goes on to lose to Conor McGregor as well. But it's when he goes up to lightweight when he eventually finds his extreme success, man. Knocked out Bobby Green, ages very well. Beats Jim Miller, has aged extremely well, and has always been a great win. before getting knocked out by Michael Johnson, but we can just forget about that one. Finishes Anthony Pettis, knocks out Justin Gaethje, knocks out Eddie Alvarez, beats Max Holloway once again, as I said, then goes on to lose to Khabib. Beautiful, beautiful fight with Dan Hooker, beats him. 2 back-to-back finishes on Conor McGregor. I know that he broke his leg, but whatever. Still 2 finishes technically. Loses to Charles Oliveira. Finishes Michael Chandler, first man and only man to ever submit Michael Chandler. Loses to Justin Gaethje. Beats Benoit Saint-Denis. Has a great fight with Islam Makhachev. Loses that one. Awesome resume, such crazy longevity in his career. Maybe I'm biased because I'm such a big Dustin Poirier fan. I am such a fanboy, and you might say, like, what the fuck, how are you ranking him above Kamaru Usman? Honestly, dude, for me, certain wins are just more impressive than a shitty title defense against somebody like Jorge Masvidal or Colby Covington. That's my personal opinion. You don't have to agree, but I'm right. So let me know in the comments what you think about that one. But yeah, number 15 for Dustin Poirier. And then at number 14, we have Dan Henderson, who's always forgotten about on these lists, but he is an all-time great, right? If you only focus on his UFC career, which was him way out of his prime, right? Yes, he had some losses there. Should have 2 wins against Michael Bisping and have an undisputed championship under his belt because Michael Bisping defended his title against Dan Henderson and robbed him. So for me, that is a win for Dan Henderson, and he should have an undisputed strap under his belt in the UFC. So 2 weight class champion in Pride, the only fighter to ever win belts in 2 weight classes in Pride. The welterweight championship he won after winning a Pride Grand Prix. How many fighters can say they won a fucking Pride Grand Prix? Beat Akihiro Gono and Ryo Chonan on the same night before beating Murillo Bustamante by split decision to win the welterweight championship. Knocked out Vanderlei Silva to win the middleweight championship. Did I mention that he also has wins over Prime Vitor Belfort? Even has a win over, or 2 wins over Mauricio Hua in the UFC. A knockout victory over Fedor Emelianenko, one of the greatest victories that you can have in general, right, in combat sports. Renato Sobral as well. And even if you get into his UFC record, right, besides those, he has wins over Hector Lombard, decent. Juzimar Palares, Rich Franklin, and as I was saying before, should have 2 wins over Michael Bisping. So you know what, dude? Dan Henderson, it may be controversial to the uninitiated, but to those who know, should not be arguing one bit about Dan Henderson's placement on this list. If anything, you should be arguing that he should be higher on this list because he's an all-time great, fucking legend, one of my favorite fighters of all time. And at number 13, it's Khabib Nurmagomedov. Oh man, I know this is going to cause a shitstorm here, but for me, Khabib just didn't do enough. He wasn't active. Half of his wins are against absolute cans on the regional scene. Comes into the UFC, right? Good wins, like okay wins. Abel Trujillo, okay. Gleison Tibau, all right. Good win over Rafael Dos Anjos. Goes on to beat Daryl Horcher. Michael Johnson, I mean, fuck. Edson Barbosa, perfect stylistic matchup. Alaya Quinta to win the belt, and then defends against Conor McGregor, perfect stylistic matchup. Dustin Poirier, it's a great win. And Justin Gaethje, very good win as well, right? Goes on to retire and then claim that he's the greatest of all time with 2 elite wins, arguably 3 if you consider Conor McGregor that. You know what, man? I don't buy it. Khabib, number 13. You might think that's disrespectful, but for me, I'm honestly pushing it, considering he has like a boxing-esque padded record filled with mostly cans, but then some elite wins to go along with it. 100%, man. Like, there's no denying that the wins against Poirier and Gaethje were very impressive, right? No one can deny that. But there's just not enough, man. Not enough meat and potatoes on the record to rank him any higher for me. And at number 12, we have a placement that hurts for me, man, because there was one point in time where I was absolutely convinced that Anderson Silva was an untouchable top 5 fighter of all time on the Mount Rushmore of MMA in general. But he's just not, man. He's still the best middleweight of all time. And because of his title defense and winning streaks, right, it'll be hard to top him. It really will be hard to top him. But when you actually just look at the resume, you look at it objectively, and just to get into it, man, right here, right? Rich Franklin, Chris Liebman, right? The Rich Franklin win was great. Beat him in the same fashion 2 times. Nate Marquardt, Travis Lutter, okay. Dan Henderson is a great win. James Irvin, Patrick Cote, Thales Leites, Forrest Griffin, Damian Maia, Chael Sonnen. Then you get into the Vitor Belfort knockout, which was very impressive. Another win over Chael Sonnen. Stephan Bonner, and then goes on a massive win streak, and loss streak, and the only win in between those is Derek Brunson. So he's propped up big time by the dominance and the title defense streak, right? Absolutely 100%. It's so hard to hold on to a title for that long and make it look as casual and simple as he made it look at that time. So his resume takes a lot away from him, but the win streak and the title defenses and the overall greatness is still there for Anderson Silva. So number 12 may even seem high for some people, because I know a lot of people say that he fought cans. No, there's no can available to fight in the UFC. There are cans available outside the UFC on the regional scene, like what Khabib was fighting, and maybe Anderson Silva was beating those guys earlier, but he still had a lot of success and holds all kinds of records in the UFC for title defenses, especially at middleweight. He's still an all-time great, but number 12 is the best I can do, baby. And then we have my boy Stipe Miocic, man. Stipe Miocic, the greatest heavyweight of all time, probably still, even with the losses to Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou, but the trilogy win against Daniel Cormier, the third fight being so dominant, right? Francis Ngannou win as well. JDS, even though he lost to JDS, he still did come back and beat JDS eventually. Alistar Overeem, Fabricio Verdum, those 4 wins right there, right? If you consider if you just erase the Daniel Cormier loss, that win streak right there of Fabricio Verdum, Alistar Overeem, JDS, Francis Ngannou, and then 2 over Daniel Cormier. As I said about Merab's run, that is a GOAT run of victories. And if you go off of those victories, you have Andrei Arlovsky at a decent time to beat Andrei Arlovsky, Mark Hunt, Fabio Maldonado, Gabriel Gonzaga, Roy Nelson. He's beaten some all-time greats, man. He has beaten some serious all-time greats. Stipe Miocic, yes, I understand he's coming off of 2 very, very bad performances, really bad performances. But then again, dude, the Jon Jones loss, I don't even consider to be a real thing that even took place at any point in time, because Stipe is 42 years old and looked like an old man in there and was still catching Jon Jones on the chin at times. But yeah, the Francis Ngannou loss was a nasty one, although I don't think it does enough to take Stipe Miocic out of this top 20. Best heavyweight of all time for me still, and number 11 on this list. And at number 10, we're going to have so many people crying in the comment section about this one. Oh my God, Peter Yan at number 10. Are you serious? Absolutely. Did you not hear what I said at the beginning, man? Did you not hear what I said at the beginning? Robberies are reversed. How many robbery losses, or should be victories, does Peter Yan have? Oh, too many to count, man. 5 losses on the record. He should arguably only have like 2, maybe 2. But let's take a look at his resume, right? John Dodson, pretty good win at the time, right? It was a pretty good win. Jimmy Rivera looked pretty good at that time too, beat him. Uriah Faber, yeah, he's a little bit older at the time, but still a pretty good win. KO with the head kick. Absolutely molly-whopped Jose Aldo. Like, the first round was competitive, but then he just goes on to beat him up. Really, really bad decision. Then you get the disqualification via illegal knee against Aljamain Sterling. No, that's a win. That's a win. Simply a win. He was winning every round of that fight. It wasn't even very competitive, man. It really wasn't. He was beating up Aljamain Sterling, and Aljamain Sterling ended up crying his eyes out. Then you get the Corey Sandhagen win, which is one of the best performances of all time. Then you get another Aljamain Sterling loss by split decision. Really, it comes down to, how you score certain rounds. For me, Aljamain Sterling won that fight by hugging, laying, and praying, did absolutely no damage, and had Peter Yan in no danger other than when he had his back. But you can probably give Aljo a 10-8 in there somewhere, so maybe you could say that you could give Peter Yan some kind of a draw, maybe. But yeah, calling it a robbery, in my opinion, like as a Peter Yan super fan, I can't even say it. But the first loss to Aljamain Sterling by disqualification should be a win. So he should have another win over Aljamain Sterling, and he should have a win over Sean O'Malley. The Merab loss was very, very clean, 100%. But now to go and beat Song Yadong in a great fight, and then to put on another masterclass against Davison Figueiredo, I don't know, man. For me, Peter Yan is one of the best fighters of all time and should be considered one of the greatest fighters of all time, if not for these robbery losses that actually took place in his career. If it wasn't for those, I believe that everyone would be unanimously considering him to be the greatest bantamweight of all time. Is this placement very generous for Peter Yan? Maybe, just maybe, but at the same time, not at all. In fact, it's pretty modest, and he could easily be a top 5 all-time great. But if we're talking about the best fighters of all time, not the tangibles, just the eye test skill that we can witness with our eyeballs, best fighter of all time, 100%. And at number 9, man, I got Poatan poets on it. I know he doesn't have a super long, storied career, but what he's done in the last few years, and this is the beauty of being active, is that if you're active, you can put yourself in a conversation like this by just fighting frequently, right? Isn't that a beautiful thing, right? He's fought like pretty much as many times in these last like 3 years as Khabib did his entire fucking career, right? Andre Michailidis, not a great victory, but made it look easy. Bruno Silva beat him up for 3 rounds, didn't knock him out somehow. Fucking GM3 knocks him down, but he can eat everything off of Alex Pereira without hitting the canvas, which is pretty nuts. But then goes on to beat Sean Strickland by KO in the first round, made that look easy, and that win aged incredibly well. Israel Adesanya, which is an elite win, then loses to Adesanya, goes up in weight, beats Jan Blachowicz, right? Former champion, elite win. Yuri Prochazka, fantastic win as well, wins the belt off of Jamal Hill. You can say Jamal Hill is not a good win, but he was champion. He was champion, and he won the belt off him. So it's still an elite win because he's a champion. Yuri Prochazka, once again, and then Khalil Roundtree. I know some people will take away from Alex Pereira, but 2 weight class champion and has defended this light heavyweight title multiple times now. And I believe will continue to do it. And what he's done in this short amount of time is enough to, for my personal taste, rank him at number 9 on this list. If you disagree, I kind of understand, right? I know it's a controversial placement, right? It's a very contentious argument whether you rank him in the top 10, the top 20, and there are a lot of people who don't even consider him anywhere near the top 20. But for me, that would be a little bit dishonest because what he's done in this short amount of time is unmatched, really. And at number 8, I have Alexander Volkanovski. Now, the recent losses take a little bit away from him, but then again, he's only losing to the absolute best fighters in the world right now, Islam Makhachev and Ilia Topuria. But he's still an all-time great, 100%. Like his run at 145 up until he got the belt. Darren Elkins early on in his career, or his UFC career, it's a pretty good win, but it's also not at the same time. It really just comes down to the run of wins against Chad Mendes, finished him relatively dominant against Jose Aldo, who's an all-time great in and of himself. Fucking Max Holloway 3 times, which is crazy. Brian Ortega, which hasn't aged greatly, but at that time he did seem like a potential world beater, going into that fight. Especially with how he looked against Korean Zombie as well. But then Max Holloway did kind of set up the blueprint of how to beat him. But Yair Rodriguez as well. Korean Zombie, but it was out of prime Korean Zombie. Dude, his resume is great. And then those losses to Islam Makhachev. I personally don't consider the first win, the first loss to Islam Makhachev to be an outright loss. And if you consider that a win, then there's an argument that you could rank Volkanovski even higher than this, but to me, it's not an egregious robbery. I don't actually think it was. I think it was so razor thin that it genuinely could have gone either way. So for me, to call it a robbery, I understand it, right? Volk looked like the smaller man. He was the underdog, and of course you want to see the underdog do well, and that can cloud your judgment. But to me, like aside from the 5th round, man, you could give pretty much any one of the first 4 rounds to Islam. When you get down to it, right, they're both landing good shots. You know what I mean? Like his performance in and of itself is enough to keep him within the top 8 all-time best fighters. Number 8 for me is fair for Volkanovski. Let me know what you guys think about that one in the comments as well. And at number 7, we have Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo, man, and the story of Jose Aldo's greatness really does come down to the longevity throughout his career, through his WEC days. Picking up wins over Uriah Faber, who was a pioneer of the lighter weight classes. Cub Swanson, Manny Gamburian comes into the UFC, beats Mark Hominick, Kenny Florian, Chad Mendes multiple times, Frankie Edgar, Korean Zombie at a time when Korean Zombie was a scary dude. Dude, fucking Frankie Edgar again, Ricardo Lamas. Right, I know he lost to Conor McGregor. Yeah, sure, he loses to Max Holloway multiple times. Goes on to beat Renato Moicano, which ages beautifully. Jeremy Stevens, a decent win there too, and then loses to Marlon Moraes, which is controversial for me. That is a straight up robbery, so I consider that a win. So it's another win over a former champion for Jose Aldo. That yes, the loss to Alexander Volkanovski it's not the worst loss to have in the record. It's not like he got completely fucked up. Peter Yan lost as well. Obviously, he's going to lose to Peter Yan because everyone will fall prey to Peter Yan. Marlon Vera, Pedro Munoz, Rob Font, Jonathan Martinez, and Mario Batista, and in between there gets completely hugged to death by Merab Dvalishvili. Not impressive in the slightest. And really, when you get down to it, the only real losses on Jose Aldo's career are against the best in the world and fighters that are also on this list, aside from Conor McGregor. You know what I mean? So it's really the longevity and the fact that Jose Aldo's been able to perform at the highest level at this time. And apparently, he's even older than we think he is. According to Gilbert Burns, he could even be in his 40s. So if Jose Aldo was performing at this level, well into his 40s, dude, it's undeniable. Jose Aldo's greatness, yes, you can take a lot away from it because of some of the losses, but it's just not enough for me to completely take away from the greatness of Jose Aldo, and he's number 7 on this list. And at number 6, we have Islam Makhachev. For me, has far surpassed Khabib's overall greatness. Some people even put Khabib in the top 5 all-time fighters, and if that's the case, there's no argument that Islam shouldn't be ahead of him and a top 3 fighter potentially, because for me, he's done a lot more. His resume is far more impressive. If you get down to it, yeah, he got knocked out early in his UFC career, but since then, he is on a ridiculous win streak. Gleison Tibau, so shares a win with Khabib right there. Nick Lentz in there as well. An early win against Arman Tsarukyan, which has aged beautifully because Arman Tsarukyan at all points in his career has been elite. He's been elite this whole time. Davey Ramos, which is, not the greatest win in the world. Drew Dober, not the greatest win in the world. Thiago Moises is pretty good. Dan Hooker has aged pretty well, I think. Bobby Green aged very well. Charles Oliveira is an elite win. And 2 wins over Alexander Volkanovski and then a win over Dustin Poirier. He has a phenomenal resume. Phenomenal resume. He's been a very dominant champion, and a win over Arman Tsarukyan once again would maybe even push him into the top 5. But for now, man, Islam Makhachev, number 6 on this list, one of the greatest and one of the best fighters of all time. When you look at skill set, the dude is just 5 times at least the fighter that Khabib was, I gotta say. At number 5, we have Fedor Emelianenko, man. For me, the greatest heavyweight in MMA history, right? When we're talking just UFC, it's probably Stipe, but overall, it's definitely Fedor Emelianenko for me, man. I rate successful Pride fighters extremely highly, and I know a lot of people are more, about confirmation bias. What have you done for me lately? Type shit. But the 1,663 days that Fedor reigned as heavyweight champion in Pride is ridiculous, not to mention the resume of wins he picked up, right? Let's take a look at his overall resume, and I'll list off the notable wins, right? We have Ricardo Arona, Renato Sobral, Heath Herring, which is a good win, right? Antonio Nogueira, Gary Goodridge, Mark Coleman, Kevin Randleman, where he was slammed on his head and somehow ended up picking up that win despite being slammed on his head. Mark Coleman again, Mirko Krokop, Antonio Nogueira again, Hongman Choi in that crazy freak show of a fight where he catches him in an armbar, Matt Lindland, Mark Hunt, Tim Sylvia, Andrei Arlovsky, dude. And then if you get past his 3 loss streak against Antonio Silva, Fabricio Verdum, and then Henderson, you get into some other great wins, like in Bellator when he ended up picking off Frank Mir. Yeah, old Frank Mir, but Fedor was old himself, so I feel like it kind of evens itself out. Chael Sonnen and Rampage Jackson. And yeah, dude, I just feel like Fedor Emelianenko is still one of the all-time greats. Like, to go undefeated in a heavier weight class like that really makes no sense. Like, for that long to be undefeated, and he was also undersized against a lot of his opponents too. Like, nowadays, if he was fighting in the UFC, he'd probably be a 205er. He would very likely be small enough to cut down there. So he was never even a big heavyweight to begin with. And like, to put it all on the line against people twice his size like Hongman Choi and still come out on top and really face adversity the way that he did and still continue to pick up wins over time, man. Fedor Emelianenko is an all-time great. Any disrespect towards Fedor will not be taken lightly. But yeah, he's number 5 on this list. Arguably deserves to be even higher, and I'm sure I will get some people in the comments calling me a casual for not ranking him at like number 1 or some shit. And at number 4, it's got to be DC for me. DC is an all-time great, so underrated when it comes to the greatest MMA fighters of all time. I was actually surprised when I realized how obvious it was to rank him this highly, because you just have to look at his resume and even consider the fact, right? He took on this Strike Force tournament as a short notice replacement, wins the fucking thing, comes into the UFC, first fight in the UFC, beats Frank Mir, goes on to beat Roy Nelson, Patrick Cummins, okay, whatever, but then ragdolls Dan Henderson and chokes him out, loses to Jon Jones. Yeah, by decision. It was relatively close, but mostly Jon Jones in that one. And then submits Anthony Johnson, who was a fucking animal at that time, a nightmare for everybody. A really great fight with Alexander Gustafsson. Split decision, but for me, it should have been unanimous. Goes on to beat Anderson Silva on short notice. It was short notice for both men, but it's not a great Anderson Silva win, but it was still before Anderson went on his massive decline, and goes on to do the same thing to Anthony Johnson. Once again, man, the no contest with Jon Jones, so technically only one loss to Jon Jones, and then goes on to beat Volkan Ozdemir. I believe he TKO'd him with ground and pound, Stipe Miocic knockout, and then submits Derek Lewis. And then, yes, of course, the two losses to Stipe Miocic could definitely put his resume or his legacy into question. But at the same time, Stipe is the greatest heavyweight of all time, and especially the third fight was when DC was into his 40s, and you know, the argument that we were saying with Stipe against Jon Jones, that Stipe is an old man now. So DC was technically an old man when he fought Stipe the third time as well. So we applied the same logic, although at no point in Cormier's career was he ever washed. He never once looked washed. He was always elite. Daniel Cormier, one of the greatest fighters of all time. Huge fan. And at number 3, we have Jon Bones Jones, dude. It turns out that Jon Jones isn't the GOAT after all, because horse beef MMA makes the rules, as you all know. 28-1 record, crazy resume, right? But then, as I said earlier in the video, dude, robberies must come into play. So let's just take a look. Let's go through his elite resume for a second, right? So he lost to Matt Hamill, right? Broke his elbow on Matt Hamill's face, doctor stoppage. Awful loss for Jon Jones, really. So a loss to Matt Hamill by fucking TKO on the record is just crazy to me. Goes on to beat Brandon Vera, which ended up aging pretty well, I guess, when Brandon Vera went into ONE FC and became champion there. But ONE FC hasn't proven to be that elite of an organization anyway. Ryan Bader, who I think was undefeated at that time. Shogun Hua, who, yeah, I understand he wasn't old, right? But these fighters who came in from Pride were pretty much like 40 years old by the time they were 30. So yeah, you have to add about 10 years of age on top of their actual ages. But he still TKO'd him, submitted Rampage Jackson, submitted Lyoto Machida, beat Rashad Evans, beat Belfort by key lock. Chael Sonnen, I mean, fucking shit win to have on the record. You have the Alexander Gustafsson fight that could have easily gone to Gustafsson. So for me, that's a dicey one. That could arguably be a loss there for Jon Jones. Gus did very, very well in that fight. He really did. It was super competitive, but one of the best title fights of all time. But you could consider that a loss for Jon Jones there, man. So let's just say it is a loss for him. One loss to Alexander Gustafsson. Beats Glover Teixeira, which aged beautifully. The win against Daniel Cormier is one of the best wins you can possibly have, right? OSP, right? The no contest. He's also a drug cheat, so that takes him down a couple of pegs as well. Then he goes on to solidify that he's better than Gustafsson by just completely dominating him and fucking brutally ground and pounding him into the canvas. The Anthony Smith win, which is like a win over Anthony Smith. Okay, who hasn't beat Anthony Smith at this point? Who gives a shit about that win? Thiago Santos, dude, considering he had 0 knees in that fight, you should have finished him. For it to be a split decision, that's a loss for me. Dominic Reyes lost unanimously first 3 rounds to Dominic Reyes. You cannot score those for Jon Jones at all. Makes no sense to score either of those 3 rounds, and Jon Jones did nothing to even get a draw, considering no 10-8s in rounds 4 or 5. So that is a unanimous decision victory for Dominic Reyes, and then goes on to beat Ciryl Gane. Stipe Miocic, 2 weight class champion, has now defended both belts. Okay. The Stipe win for me doesn't really factor in much, but I understand that it is still Stipe Miocic on the record, and he does have a couple fighters that are on my top 20 greatest all-time fighters on his resume. So I have to give some respect to Jon Jones. At the same time, buddy, you're not the GOAT. You're not even top 2. You're not even top 2 because you got a couple losses on that record, man, that take away from your overall greatness. And you're a drug cheat. You beat up your wife, hit and run with a pregnant lady. So this is a spiteful placement. I was for a second here, I was honestly going to rank him below Daniel Cormier, but I understood how ridiculous that would honestly look. And then at number 2, we have Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. Alrighty, Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, Ian McCall, Joseph Benavidez, dude. John Dodson was a beast around that time. John Moraga, Benavidez again, dude. few other shitty wins that nobody cares about. John Dodson again, Henry Cejudo, Tim Elliott, Wilson Reese, Ray Borg. These were all the best fighters available around flyweight at that time. And admittedly, the flyweight division wasn't as talent rich around that time. I also think that it's because Demetrius was just levels above anybody who he could have fought around that time. And then his last fight in the UFC, the split decision against Henry Cejudo, for me, DJ won that fight. I believe DJ won that fight. I consider it to be a bit of a robbery, personally. So I think he should have 2 wins over Triple C, and that robbery victory for Triple C is one that would have put him on this list to begin with. So that's why I left him off the list, because I don't consider that really a win for him. I think it was just a convenient situation for Triple C, considering Demetrius Johnson was on his way out anyway, goes to ONE FC, and I don't really care about his first few wins in ONE FC, but to win the trilogy against Adjana Moraes is very clearly an elite fighter, and I think he would do actually very well in the UFC as well. I don't consider him to be a bad win just because it didn't take place in the UFC. For me, that's just ridiculous to say. I consider that to be quite a good win, in all honesty. I really do, or a great win, and to come back and then beat Moraes with the knee in the same, or not exactly the same fashion, but a similar fashion to how he beat him in the first fight, and then just dominate him. Right, just dominate him to solidify his dominance and his greatness in the trilogy fight, dude. Oh, man, Demetrius Johnson, man, arguably the best fighter of all time, other than Peter Yan. Like when it just comes down to the eye test, and surely one of the greatest. Top 2 for me. If you disagree, I understand, right? Some people just don't really rate his resume and can take away from him because of that. But I just don't think it's enough. I don't think it's enough to take away from Demetrius Johnson and take him off this list. It just isn't enough. So Demetrius Johnson, number 2 on Horse Beef MMA's definitive top 20 GOAT list. And at number 1, we have the only one that makes sense to me. That's George Rush St Pierre, GSP, the greatest fighter of all time. No real controversies. Yeah, some people said that he was ducking, good middleweight champions, then came out of retirement at the perfect possible time to beat the worst champion in middleweight history in Michael Bisping. So I kind of understand that, I guess, but that shouldn't take away from his overall greatness, because he still got the strap, right? Michael Bisping had to win the strap in order to hold the strap in the first place. So he still beat a champion in Michael Bisping to become a 2 weight class champion, obviously. So I'm not too sure how beating any champion can take away from your legacy at all. But 2 weight class champion, as I said, the Johnny Hendricks win of his, which I consider a win still, but Johnny Hendricks was on fucking rocket fuel. So even if he did get that win, it still would have been overturned anyway. So it's still, regardless, a win for GSP. So that can't even be considered a robbery in this context. You know what I mean? Because that fight would have been overturned regardless, right? So GSP, and then the greasing thing, right? The greasing thing, which has never even been proven, but to me, GSP is irrefutably the GOAT. If we just go through his resume here, right? Caro Parisian early in his career is a super underrated win. Mayhem Miller, Frank Trigg, Sean Shirk, dude, the muscle shark who was on all kinds of rocket fuel. I think even tested positive. GSP beat him, TKO'd him. Split decision win against BJ Penn, dude. TKO'd Matt Hughes to avenge his first loss of his career, dude. TKO'd him bad. Josh Koscheck, Matt Hughes, once again, dude, armbar. Matt Serra avenges his other loss right after he lost that title. John Fitch, who I believe was on like a 17-fight win streak at that time, cracked a 17-fight win streak in John Fitch. Another win against BJ Penn, TKO. Thiago Alves, who was another juiced up motherfucker, dude, a juiced up beast that GSP beat very dominantly. Another dominant victory over Josh Koscheck, just destroyed him with the jab. Jake Shields, Carlos Condit, Nick Diaz, I guess is not the craziest win in the world, but it also is pretty underrated. Johnny Hendricks, rocket fueled up Johnny Hendricks, split decision. You can call it a robbery all you want, but in my opinion, like I said earlier, there's just no argument for it. And then, as we were talking about earlier, Michael Bisping to close out his career. In my opinion, one of the most perfect careers you can possibly have. Any loss that he did have, he managed to come back and avenge it, which for me is far more impressive than going about your whole career taking stylistic mismatches that favor you, right? GSP was fighting serious animals and stylistic issues for him, man. Well-rounded grapplers, and he was beating them at their own game. Johnny Hendricks, especially the steroided up version. He looked like the boogeyman for GSP, and GSP stood in front of him, put on a great fight with him, took his best shots, and still, in my opinion, took 3 rounds off Hendricks in that fight. He took 3 rounds off him, man. I don't think it's a robbery one bit. I really don't. I really don't. And it doesn't matter anyway. But still, dude, GSP, man, number 1 of all time. There's no argument for me that he isn't. There's no argument that any other fighter in UFC history is greater than GSP. There is just no argument about it. He has beaten all types of all-time greats and has arguably, I would say irrefutably actually, the greatest resume of all time. George St Pierre is solidified, the GOAT, and it's going to take a lot to surpass him. It's going to take a lot. If Jon Jones wants to even come close to surpassing him, he's going to have to defend that heavyweight title at least once more against Tom Aspinall. Otherwise, there's just no argument for it. Really, GSP is the GOAT. You disagree, then you disagree. That's fine, man. If you think Demetrius is ahead of him, that's okay, man. I'm okay with whichever one. But you cannot tell me that GSP is not at least top 2 and ahead of Jon Jones, because Jon Jones is a fucking drug cheat, piece of trash, and GSP is not. Stand-up individual, poon hound, man, in his prime, just going around, absolutely slaying everything that moves. He's just a man's man, right? He's also a nice dude, best trash talker in the game. GSP is the best at everything. He's the man, greatest MMA fighter of all time. Let's go. And that does conclude my list. Let me know in the comments section what you think about my placement, dude. This was a long-ass video, man. If you watched all the way through, just let me know your overall thoughts on the placement. If you're upset, dude, then show me how emotional you are in the comments as well. But either way, guys, I appreciate you watching, whether you enjoyed or you didn't. Appreciate you watching. And I'll see you on the next one.